Good evening, members. Before proceeding with today's meeting, may I ask for confirmation of your agreement that Councillor Brian Ellis be appointed as the chairman of this Central Area Planning Committee for the council year 2016-17? Thank you, that's agreed. Councillor Ellis, if you'd like to make your way to the dais.
Good evening, members. I must admit a certain feeling of déjà vu, but let's not worry. Thank you for electing me your chairman. Let us move on very quickly to the appointment of vice chairman. And can I invite you please to confirm that Councillor David Else be appointed as the Vice Chairman of the Central Area Planning Committee for the Council year 2016-17. Thank you very much. David. Moving on then, members. Item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of April 2016. Is it your wish that I sign those as a correct record? Thank you. I shall do that a little later. And perhaps just for the gentleman up there in the public gallery, before we move quickly on, there are no plans for a fire alarm test this evening. So should you hear a continuously ringing bell, quickly follow the chairman up here, who will be beating a hasty retreat out of the building via one of those the 3 green marked exits, and we gather underneath the canopy outside Waitrose, maybe for a bit of evening shopping, whatever. Members, and you sir in the public gallery, could I ask you please to ensure that your mobile phones are switched off or to silent? And finally, members, we are being webcast. Last night it was a little difficult as everything blew up, but tonight everything seems to be working. Could I ask you please be sure that your cards are pressed in and speak well into the microphone. Thank you very much. Item 4 then, Gary, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Peter Martin, and I've also been advised that Councillor Nick Williams may well be late to the meeting today.
Thank you very much. Item 5, declarations of interest.
None received prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any late declarations, members? No. Questions by members of the public?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
We've done the minutes.
Sorry?
We haven't done the minutes.
Yeah, we did the minutes. Yes. Come on, keep on, David. Dinner's getting cold at home. Item 7 then, any relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since the last meeting? Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have an update for members on the Planning and Housing Bill, which received royal assent on the 13th of May and now comprises the Planning and Housing Bill Act. The Act includes a number of significant changes. However, I'll just highlight key planning matters and will circulate a copy of the Act if you'd appreciate following this meeting for your consideration. The key changes include the inclusion of starter homes as a form of affordable housing. It is understood that new development coming forward will be required to provide 20% of the homes as starter homes as part of the affordable housing offer, and once relevant legislation is published to support these changes. Planning authorities will be also required to meet demand for custom build and self-build homes by granting planning permissions for suitable sites. I updated you, I believe, last meeting on self-build and custom build, and the Council is currently holding a register of those to identify what our need is. The Housing and Planning Bill also creates a duty for local authorities to hold a register of various types of land, with the intention of creating a register of brownfield land to facilitate unlocking land to build new homes and giving housing sites identified in the brownfield register local and neighbourhood plans, planning permission in principle, and providing an opportunity for applicants to obtain planning permission in principle for small-scale housing sites also. Members may be aware that the Council is part of a pilot scheme about how we deliver the brownfield register, and at this stage it doesn't hold weight, but it's looking at the mechanism and how that would work in practice. In terms of neighbourhood planning, the Act seeks to simplify and speed up the neighbourhood planning process to support communities that seek to meet local housing and other development needs through the neighbourhood planning process. It also gives the Secretary of State further powers to intervene if local plans are not effectively delivered. It extends the planning performance regime to apply to smaller applications, putting economic benefits of proposals for developments before local planning authority committees. The government will also carry out a time-limited pilot on competition in the planning processing of planning applications, which will be fully evaluated prior to full implementation. The practical implementation of an Act will now be taken forward. However, at this stage I cannot provide a timetable for this. We will therefore await further announcements regarding implementation, and I will of course provide a further update on this once it is received. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Peter. I believe you at least said in Easton, I may have already said here as well, perhaps what you've said this evening might be sent out as a suitable update to members. I'm sure they would appreciate that.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I will circulate the Act and some comments around that for members of the committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Martin.
Pardon my ignorance, Chairman, but I wonder if we could have the definition of a starter home, because it's not necessarily something that's fresh in my mind as to exactly what constitutes a starter home over any other type of home.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that was quite a lot of discussion about what the definition of a starter home would be. But as I understand it, it would be a property of a value no greater than £250,000 outside of London. I think the figure in London is 400,000. Obviously, we wouldn't have to 450. Sorry, so we wouldn't have that issue. So for our area, it would be a property of a maximum value of 250,000, and it will be a reduced rate to market value of 20%. Minimum. So, say if the property, and yes, and the last point is to relate to first-time buyers, and the purpose of it is to assist people to get onto the housing ladder at that point. There's an extra point that's sort of still in discussion, and I don't think it's been finalised, is the longevity of that, whether it's kept at reduced value for 5 years or 20 years or 10 years. I mean, the Council's preference and our response to the consultation on it was a requirement to keep it as long as possible, so a 20-year period, so it was kept at reduced rate, so you didn't get to a 5-year buffer and you have the same issue again, you've got to look for more housing. But that is to be finalised, as I understand. Hopefully that's helpful, Councillor Martin. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Thornton, I don't know whether you're staging a minor protest or something. Your nameplate is the wrong way up. Okay. Mr. Holder.
Can I just ask, in addition to starter homes, is the right to buy, which I understand is the government reduces the mortgage rate to 5% initial capital, and the rest is at a subsidised rate. Does that apply to starter homes as well?
Thank you, Chairman. I believe they're two separate things. The starter homes would be an affordable element, but it would be sort of open to the market, whereas the right to buy comes through Council's rented regime, so there would be two separate elements and they wouldn't be able to impact on one another. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any further questions on that, members? No? Let us move on then to applications for planning permission. At 8.1 on your agenda, you'll find that if there are any site visits necessary arising from this meeting, they will be held on Monday the 13th of June at a time to be agreed at this meeting. Moving on then to applications. None of these are subject to public speaking this evening. Item B1 W 2016/0280, the change of use and alterations to first, second and third floors from retail storage Class A1 to 2 dwellings Class C3, construction of external walkway, erection of outbuilding at 51 High Street, Godalming. It's not Vicky Corrigan, it is Kathy.
Thank you, Chairman. The application site is located to the south of Godalming High Street. To the west of the site is Pound Lane here, and you have the Lloyds Bank on the corner here. The ground floor of this premises is currently occupied by a stationery shop, and the upper floors are used as ancillary storage and office space to serve that retail unit. At the back there is sort of a rear surfacing yard used to support the retail use. As mentioned by the Chairman, the application seeks the change of use of the upper floors of that building to residential. The plan here has been orientated slightly differently, so north is in this direction to the left hand side of the plan here. You've got Lloyds Bank here and the application property here. The grey line here is the proposed access walkway across a flat roofed area at the back of the property behind the main 3-storey facade onto the high street. So these are the existing floor plans. As you can see, the shop on the ground floor with its entrance here from the high street, sort of doglegging back at the rear of the store with some storage areas here, and the first, second and third floors used as ancillary storage and office space. So these are the elevations. The main elevation here, which I think is actually it is the southern elevation, I beg your pardon, which is the elevation which fronts the high street. This is the side elevation. As you can see, the adjoining property outlined here in white, and the long flat roofed area at the rear, which is part of the application site. On the ground floor, the existing retail use would remain in place with the same access from the high street and the storage and office space at the back. On the first floor, there would be a 1-bedroomed unit accessed via this external walkway across the flat roof sections, and the upper second and third floors would be converted into a 3-bedroomed residential unit, again accessed by that walkway. Here are the elevations of the proposed development. As you can see, the only sort of external change would be the provision of railings along this flat roof walkway to access the properties. The application follows on from a previous planning application which was granted. There have been various amendments to the scheme, and the most recent one was in 2013. That permission is extant and is therefore a highly material planning consideration. That planning application allowed the change of use of the first, second and third floors into 3 flats. The most recent plans are shown here. So you had the second and third floors here, which are laid out into flats, and again the first floor laid out into a flat with the shop floor retained at ground floor. The only differences between the extant scheme and the scheme before members this evening is the mix and number of units being proposed. So the 2013 Commission proposed 2 one-bedroomed flats and 1 two-bedroomed flat. The current proposal is for 1 one-bedroomed flat and 1 three-bedroomed flat. In addition, the extant scheme in 2013 also proposed alterations to the front of the unit on the high street to provide a separate entrance up into the flats, which would have taken away some of the retail use on the ground floor. That has since been eliminated in the current scheme, as the access will be taken wholly from the rear of the site. So there would be no interference with the ground floor retail space or indeed the facade of the shop on the Godalming High Street. These are just some photographs just to give you an indication. This is obviously the back of the High Street, and this is the application property here. As you can see, it is a tall building, and the walkway would go along this area here into the first floor, which is at this level here, and provide the access for those properties. This is just a slightly different angle. This is the existing rear servicing yard, which serves the retail unit as it is. This would become a shared communal garden area to serve the 2 proposed flats. The walkway would start here and go across the back and through to the unit. This tree would be retained. There would be an area of parking in this location and an additional parking space here to serve both the flats and the existing retail use. If I could just draw your attention to the printed update sheet. The recommendation in the report was subject to the views of the County Highway Authority. We haven't received any objection from the Highway Authority on this application. The matters of principal and technical judgment to be considered this evening are the principle of the development, bearing in mind that this is a town centre site wherein a mix of uses are encouraged to maintain the vitality and viability of the town centre. The planning history, which I've taken you through, it is a highly material consideration, and you are being asked to consider the differences between the 2 proposals. The impact on air quality and archaeology are matters of technical opinion to which no objection is raised. And similarly, the number of parking spaces is considered to be appropriate, having regard to the parking guidelines. This evening you're being asked to exercise your judgment on a number of matters, namely the impact on the setting of the list of buildings, the impact on the conservation area and the protected tree, which was in the photograph I showed you, and the impact on residential amenity. The recommendation is therefore as set out on the update sheet that, subject to conditions 1 to 11 and informatives 1 to 8 in the report, permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Little rush. Mr. Thornton.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask how many car park spaces they are providing?
I believe there are 5, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is in my ward. I believe it is a very good proportionate development of 2 small homes with adequate parking, just what we need in Godalming. I note that it doesn't seem to be materially more than an already approved scheme. But I would like to refer you to one of those photographs which the officers have very kindly shown. The rear of this building is an absolute mess. I visited the site and I would describe it as a bit of a dump with a lot of overgrown vegetation. And I wonder whether it's possible to require the developers to improve, tidy up the rear as part of the application.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, we noted that from the photos as well. In terms of that would actually become a sort of communal area for residents. So in general, it would come into use rather than just a sort of rear access. So as part of the block plan, it shows a pathway being provided, retention of the trees. What we could add, if you've got concern that or would like to see further landscaping, a standard just landscaping condition to provide details of any lawn area and additional planting that's to be provided. And we'll happily add that to the recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I would be
Chairman.
grateful if that could be considered.
Thank you very much. And perhaps they might also do a little bit of ivy removal from that, I believe, a protected tree as well, whilst they're at it. Next one, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this appears to improve the area considerably, particularly I think with the photograph in front of us being turned into a communal area, and the added bonus of that communal garden area alongside parking provision, which are both rarities for high street dwellings. And I think for that reason we should be supporting this. This is absolutely the sort of thing that this council, that this committee has said we like, and we've so often sort of moaned and groaned that there's a lack of parking and a lack of communal space. I'm really pleased that the shop front in the application before us is now unchanged, thus preserving the character of the high street and indeed the conservation area. And allowing that shop to continue trading without hindrance, and it does seem to allow the shop more commercial space. I'm also aware that there's less need for that ancillary shop space in modern commercial properties, and I suspect that the sort of first, second, third floors are simply dormant and unused. So it does seem to make a good use of what is a particularly large building on our high street, and I think given all that I'd be happy to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Chairman. I think previously the previous schemes we've broadly supported. Given this is the 10th application in about 3 years, I'll confine my comments because I may have to be making different ones in a year's time and they change their mind yet again. I think this is a better scheme than the last one. I think they've reduced the number of units, which I think is good. I didn't like the fact that the shop was going to have some of the frontage taken out by a staircase to the front, which actually the people opposite want to do to make that shop probably untenable. So I think it's much better the access is all from the back. And I think only having two units will make sure that there is enough parking for everybody. So it is a better scheme, so I do support it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm generally in favour of the scheme, but I wondered if the fire officer has been involved, as there's only one access point for the occupants to get out of this building across flat roofs. I don't know if that has been considered, and I haven't seen anything in the report that kind of switches me into that. Is the access considered safe enough for them to get across these roofs? Should there be fires be in the buildings below, not just in the buildings they're in?
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just come back on that, obviously a very important consideration, but that will be caught up or collected up in the building regulations assessment of the scheme in terms of access and egress in the event of emergency. So that will be collected there.
Thank you. It seemed to me an important point, being as it's such a long access to get into the building.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to echo what's been said by everybody else. I also had a wander up there and saw Steptoe's yard and thought it would be quite nice if it was tidied up. So I think that the landscaping condition would would take care of that well. I'm still a little confused about the labelling of the elevations. I'm sure what you've got as south elevation is the north elevation, but you did wonder. Yeah, so did I. So it's either that or the east and west of a thing. But I think, I mean, this historically it would have been accommodation above a shop. So really we're just returning to the status quo, and I think it's a good scheme and fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have no problems with this, so therefore it's no point in commenting any further. Just one question, however. On page 27, we're talking about impact on air quality, and it suggests at the top of page 27 that suitable mitigation measures, if the application is granted, would be secured by condition. But there isn't actually a condition in the recommended granting. So could I ask for some advice on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We've got condition 5, which is on page 32 of the agenda, and that looks to that is for a site management plan during construction for the suppression of mud, grit, dust during those works and any other emissions that might result from the construction works. So that's condition 5. And then on condition 6, which is also important, is that there should be no burning of materials on site given the nearby air quality management zone. So feel those conditions adequately control that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I was perhaps thinking of air quality over a much longer period of time and not just during that construction phase. That's how I'd interpreted it, but I see now that you're only considering the construction phase.
Thank you, Chairman. That's correct, yes. Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Well, just picking up on Councillor Lee's point, it does say the proposed site introduces new residential accommodation into an area which may expose future and existing occupants to air pollution associated with road traffic. So that suggests to me, I read it the same way as Councillor Lee, that it's concerned about air pollution for the future occupants of the flat. And as that clause does go on and says about being secured by condition, I think there needs a condition to protect the future occupants. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the point we'd add to that is these are the conditions that are recommended by the Council's Environmental Health Air Quality team. They haven't felt it necessary to add anything additional over and above that. It is a mixed-use area. It's residential surrounding it. We're content that, subject to the construction works being caught up, within those conditions, that there wouldn't be an adverse impact based on the recommended conditions from the Environmental Health team. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Given that clearly we've had a few problems with the way this is articulated, can I ask that in future there's a much clearer articulation so we know exactly what we're dealing with? Thank you.
Thank you. That point's noted, and we're sure it's clearer when it comes to you again with these issues. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Did I see you indicating, Mr. James? No? Oh. You're welcome to speak if you wish. Any other... Landscaping condition do they want to do that? Any other speakers? Fine. Before we move to the recommendation, there was some discussion about landscaping, particularly in this particular area by the tree. Are we agreed that we would, well, I'm happy to propose that additional condition if somebody would care to second it. Thank you. Are we agreed on that additional Thank you very much. I think that about covers it. So let's move then to the update sheet that's subject to conditions 1 to 11 and informatives 1 to 8 as set out in the report, and the additional landscaping condition, permission be granted. Are we agreed? Thank you very much. Moving on. Item B2, WA 2016/0151, alterations to existing dwelling and access together with associated works to provide 6 dwellings as amended by plans received on the 25th of April this year at Gorse Hill, Petworth Road, Waverley. Jenny. Ladies and gentlemen, Jenny Seaman.
Thank you, Chairman. If I'm just going to go through the determining issues first. Oh, sorry. I'm going the wrong way. Okay. Beg your pardon. Right, the application is on the east side of Petworth Road. The red line shows the application site, and the blue line that you can see around is the other land owned by the applicant. And the black dotted line is the area showing where the 2 passing bays are located. The layout plan here shows you the building here is an existing single-storey studio, which would have 1 residential unit in it. The building here is a 2-storey garage, which would have a unit, a single-storey element here, which would have a unit, and then the main house, which would have 3 units. The black dotted lines are showing the amenity areas which would be available for each of the units. They're to be separated by yew hedges along the side boundaries, but the rear boundaries would be left open, so although people would have their own private area, it wouldn't then create separate enclosed areas for each of the units, so it would keep the whole site open. This is just showing the passing bays. The one closest to the main access is actually a double bay. I've had confirmation from the highways expert for the agent that the double bay is large enough for a refuse vehicle to pass in. And then further along you have a single bay, so it provides areas for people to pass, rather than at the moment you just have a single track with no passing areas. The plan here is a new one that I've received today. I think if you have a look at the plan that's in your agendas, you'll see that the tracking for the refuse vehicles showed a cycle store next to parking space number 16. That isn't correct. The bin store and the cycle store are both located at the top. So what this has is an amended plan to show you that the refuse vehicle can turn, even though the cycle store and bin store are at the next door to each other at the top of the site. Just for information, that's the front elevations of the house. The main changes would be extra doors to create the 3 units, and that's just showing you the rear of the property. I think one of the important things here is that the proposal maintains the buildings pretty much unaltered, so you retain what's quite an attractive building within the countryside and greenbelt. And on the determining issues, on principle of development, the MPPF actually does encourage reuse of existing resources, and that includes conversion of existing buildings. Obviously this one is for a conversion of buildings with minimal changes to the appearance, and also gives you the benefit of an increase in residential dwellings on the site. The County Highway Authority has confirmed they have no objections in terms of highway safety capacity or policy grounds. And the access road is also a bridleway, public bridleway. So we've also had comments from the rights of way officer to confirm that they've no objection to the development subject to those 2 passing bays being provided. The site is in Greenbelt. Reuse of the buildings and engineering operations are amongst those that are not necessarily inappropriate development. In this case, the reuse of the buildings and the new parking areas are considered to preserve the openness of the Greenbelt, and therefore considered acceptable in the Greenbelt in this location. The new bin store and cycle store aren't within any of the exceptions listed by the NPPF, so they amount to inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. But they're considered acceptable because they're limited in size. They're needed to make the development acceptable, and they're preferable to extending the existing buildings. As there's only minimal alterations to existing buildings, and since the development's pretty tightly contained, if I go back to that original slide, at the moment the development's pretty tightly contained within that area in the centre. That would be maintained with the new development as well, so it's not considered that the development would be detrimental to visual amenity or detrimental to the landscape character of the area. As you can see from the drawings, it's a considerable distance from any other dwellings in the area, so it wouldn't have any direct impact on anybody. And it would also give a benefit to the property here and the one further up here, in that they'd have the passing bays to enable easier access in and out along the access road. The proposal provides acceptable living conditions and amenity space, and also appropriate areas for play space, and the proposal is therefore recommended for approval subject to the conditions that are listed in the report. If I bring your attention just to the update sheet, obviously the amendment to the condition was for the additional plan number. That would now be changed to the new drawing which we've had here, which, as I say, was received today. And that's, if there's any questions, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Oh. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say I think this is a very clever use of an existing attractive building. Obviously, if finances must decree that got to do something with it, and this seems beneficial to all round. So I'm with the officers on this one.
Sorry. Sorry, I've forgotten what that was. Thank you very much. Mr. Bolton, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe this is a fine-looking house, as shown by the photographs, and I'm somewhat disappointed that it has to be converted into multiple occupancy, but I recognise it will bring a benefit of an increase in the number of dwellings. However, is it possible, likely, that Studio 6, or property Unit 6, which is described as a studio, and I think is a one-storey building, is it possible that the owner will in future request changes and extensions and alterations? And is there any way of limiting that?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, if I could just come back on that. I mean, there is a possibility of future residents wanting to do that. They would, however, have to come to the council to seek permission to, because condition, sorry, bear with me 1 minute, I'm just flicking through. Condition 2 on page 61 of your agenda restricts all permitted development rights, which we think is appropriate, given the relationship between properties and the large sort of curtilage potential. So any future extensions would have to be considered and reviewed by the council before anything further can go ahead, and we could then take account of the impact visually on those properties, but we can't prevent them from seeking those in the future, as that would be sort of an unreasonable position. to take. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Holder.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm the ward councillor for Whitley, so this comes under my area. It first came to the attention of the parish council in January, and there was a significant concern because the access route was very narrow, and they were worried that the construction vehicles and things would be forced to back onto the main Petworth Road. So I'm very glad to see that there is now a proposal to put in some passing bays. However, the applicant has agreed, and I think it is stated on page page 44, that the passing bays should be considered as a condition. And I'm slightly worried that if you turn to page 61, which refers to condition number 3, that it says prior to first occupation of any residential units. I'd like to see that condition amended to prior to the commencement of the alteration to the units, that the passing bays should be instituted. In other words, they should be instituted before any building work commences. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Would that be dealt with, Peter?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you, Councillor Holder. That's a good point to raise, and we're happily, subject to all your agreement, to amend that condition to include that. The only thing I would suggest is that, in addition on that condition, we should include "and thereafter retained" to ensure that it's maintained in perpetuity. Because given the change in wording, they might construe that as just the construction phase, so it just gives that assurity. So we can have those 2 points with all your agreement. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Martin.
My comment was going to be about condition 3, and I would happily support that proposal, both to change the wording to commencement of works and indeed to maintain that. So I think that's a very sensible move, because ultimately the most likely heavy traffic is going to be during the construction phase of this renovation, and not when it's simply residential users coming in and out.
Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very happy with this. I'd much rather that the existing building is reused rather than knocked down and rebuilt in some other form by somebody else who wishes to own the site, if you like. It's going to be a pretty nice stately lock up and leave for 6 residents, and I think it'll be a nice place to live, and I'm very supportive. I agree with Councillor Holder's amendment to the condition. I think that's absolutely right, because there'll be a lot of heavy traffic using the access at the beginning of the commencement of the works, and actually that is probably going to be more of a problem than a refuse lorry coming in once a week. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mrs.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to second the amendment for Councillor Holder for prior to commencement of the passing bays. Thank you.
I was coming to that, but anyway. If there are no further comments, I'll go back to Mr. Holder's suggestion of an amendment. If I can deal with this amendment first, Mr. Lee, please. Mr. Holder has suggested a condition amendment to condition 3, which I believe Mrs. James is happy to second. Are we all comfortable with that one? Thank you very much. And with that one, Mr. Martin. Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I feel pretty content with this application. Particularly impressed by the fact that this aspect of passing bays has been thoughtfully introduced. And also the size of the units, floor area well above minimum standards, which is a very good thing to see. And the access onto Petworth Road appears to have very decent splay lines, and that's good. I do appreciate and just like to comment that we do rely on experts, and yet obviously a resident on page 46 it is, under the representations, shows sort of significant local knowledge. So although we do have to rely on experts, to a certain extent what is being reflected by those two letters cuts across something that the experts sort of say we should agree with. Now the other thing is just the one more thing, and that is how useful it is to have this swept path analysis, which I have not come across before. Very useful indeed. Personally, I would have felt much happier if there was space between the turning line and plot 13 and coming to rest right up hard against parking plot 7. There is no, from that I see no flexibility for the future, depending on the skill of the driver on the one hand, and the fact that the refuse vehicles there of certain dimensions, I don't believe there's going to be any sort of restriction on increasing those dimensions with vehicles in the future. So there is no flexibility going forward with the space that's available there. Those are the only comments I have to make, or how I see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. Any further speakers? Officers, any further comments? No? Let's perhaps go then to the update sheet and the recommendation. We have an amendment, or agreed amendment to condition 3. And the revised recommendation then is that subject to conditions 1 to 8 and informatives 1 to 9 as set out in the report, and an amendment to both condition 3, which we have agreed, and condition 4 on the update sheet, permission be granted. Can I see those in favour of this recommendation, please?
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Thank you very much. Those against? Are you abstaining?
One abstention.
Thank you very much. We do appear to be in a hurry here.
The meeting hasn't finished yet. The meeting hasn't finished yet.
Yes, I was going to say. Oops. Clearly the pubs are open. I was only going to thank you for being here and wish you all a very, very safe journey home. Thank you.